is under the fan now.
Monkey, 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 monkey.
Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, let us continue on with our discussions about this phenomenal work of art, this great piece of cinema history, and this great piece of the world and the lore and the legend that is Twin Peaks. And I'm speaking of this film, directed by David Lynch from the year 1992, Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. So there is a lot that can be said about this. And as you know, we have been trying to go through this work in a type of piecemeal fashion, going through each of the segments in a type of chronological order as they occur in this film, in this great film. And so now, if it's okay with you, let us carry on with this discussion. And before we go into any specifics, I'd like to say once again that we will be touching upon, or we may be speaking about, other Twin Peaks stories as reference points. So that means specifically we may touch upon aspects of the pilot and seasons 1 and 2. Those have been already broadcast prior to the release of this film, Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me in 92. However, this is also to say that I won't be directly speaking about or touching upon or referencing directly any subsequent Twin Peaks stories. So anything that happens after the release of this film in 1992, we will maybe talk about in a separate video or separate video discussions, but not now, because I want to speak about things that have been released or broadcast prior to and including the release of this film, Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. So just in case, for those who have not yet seen, say, any subsequent Twin Peaks episodes or parts or series, etc., again, no need to worry about that, because this is going to be focusing on everything up to and including Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. And also, that is my way to saying that if you have not yet seen the pilot or seasons 1 or seasons 2, then I strongly encourage you to check out those seasons prior to your watching of Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, and indeed also prior to your watching this video, because I may actually speak about specific points that have occurred in those television broadcast seasons. So I think I strongly recommend watching those first prior to getting into this film, Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. And then also, I should say too that I am not holding myself out to be in any way, shape, or form an expert when it comes to Twin Peaks. So I don't have all the answers, and I don't have a grasp on all the details, which means that I will get things wrong, or maybe my views or interpretations might not be the same as yours. But again, I'm coming at this as a fan of this work and a fan of the show. I've seen the show in episodes many times. I've seen this film many times. And so I'm trying to, one of the things I'm hopefully I can try to do with these videos is to try to convey just how much I really love this work, Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. So that's, again, I'm approaching this as a fan, not the biggest expert in the world, but as a fan of this great work of art, which is Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. So without further ado, my dear friends, let us continue with our conversations. Okay, so now we are well on our way into the story of Laura Palmer and the world of Twin Peaks. And regarding that, we are now at the part where Laura Palmer is returning home to the Palmer household. Once again, let's keep note of the exterior of the Palmer house, because we see in many moments, or in some of the moments in, say, the past episodes, we see the exterior of the Palmer house. And I dare say, too, we may see the exterior of the Palmer house perhaps in Well, let's hold off on any future subsequent Twin Peaks discussions for future videos. But in any event, my dear friends, just keep in mind what the Palmer household and the exterior of the house looked like in past episodes versus what it looks like now. It's a very interesting thing. Again, similarities and differences, things that feel similar yet maybe feel unknown or maybe uncertain. And I think that's, and also the geographical changes or environmental changes, subtle yet different, yet also feeling similar and maybe at home and welcoming at the same time. That's the wonderful paradox that is Twin Peaks. And this is already welcoming us as we go back into the household. Laura calling out for her mother, seeing that there doesn't seem to be anyone there. She goes up to her room. Again, we've seen her room in especially some of the earlier aspects of the, say, the pilot and the earlier parts of the Twin Peaks show. But again, notice the layout, notice the similarities and differences here. And of course, we understand too that there's a hiding place, and she reaches for the diary, the secret diary. And this is something that we see her writing in with on the bed and smoking. And also we see the detail of the pages torn out, along with the sound. If you notice the soundtrack, there is the sound which sounds like ripping pages, which is, I think, a really cool detail, very frightening, chilling detail. And this brings us to a shot of, she's very panicked because something about this ripped pages seems to be worrying her immensely. Now, we are reminded already of a number of points from the show, right, which is the secret diary, the ripped pages, and something about the contents of those ripped pages. And so we're getting, again, more links to, quote unquote, the past or the future. The past being the broadcast episodes of Twin Peaks, the future being the stories that are yet to come in the chronology, the world itself of Twin Peaks, because this is a prequel in that form. Again, future and past. But going back into, quote unquote, the future and the past, we then get a shot of the car driving towards a house, which seems, again, familiar. And we get to the inside or the interior, we see Harold Smith. Harold Smith is back, or Harold Smith is here. And we remember Harold Smith from the earlier episodes, and also we recall Harold Smith's link to this secret diary because of the efforts in particular of Donna in trying to obtain this diary from Harold Smith in the hopes of trying to figure out some more clues as to the murder of Laura Palmer back in the Twin Peaks TV series. And so here we get the interaction between Laura and Harold Smith. We remember Harold Smith is he's inside. He cannot venture outside for fear of this type of phobia that he is feeling. But he also understands, we understand, he has this great affection for Laura. And we see in this interaction between the two of them that Laura seems to share certain information with Harold. She has shared some information in the past before, but now she is revealing more information to him and thus to us. The revelation about Bob, and also the revelation that Bob is real, and Bob has been having her since she was 12, which is a very disturbing detail. And then also the idea that the ripped pages are a manifestation, or indeed proof, according to Laura, about how real Bob is. And so Harold seems to be somewhat digesting this information for the first time, also maybe in a state of disbelief, not quite sure how to take this. But Laura is very insistent. Laura is very aggressive. And she then, of course, mentions other things too, like how it was Harold who insisted, or it was on Harold's insistence that she write it down in the first place. Thus, perhaps, I don't know if this means in any way associating the diary even further with Harold Smith. And we recall from the series, Harold Smith had this notion about inner feelings and writing them down. And remember the interactions in the series between him and Donna, for example. And so this is, I think, further linking Harold and Laura and the diary, thus making, I think, very apropos from a plot standpoint that the diary would ultimately land in his hands, which it does, and it will be picked up again, which will be picked up again in the chronology of Twin Peaks, but has already been picked up when we think about the broadcast history of Twin Peaks and the series episodes involving Harold Smith and Donna and Meals on Wheels, etc. And also in this interaction here in the film, Laura has this maybe almost power over Harold. Harold seems to be in a type of trance or totally dependent or reliant on Laura, and Laura seems almost in a way to be the maybe the she seems to be able to talk to Harold, or maybe, I don't want to say manipulating Harold in a way, because that might give a sense of a type of Machiavellian nature of Laura, which I don't quite mean. But there is a way in which we can see a type of psychologically related dependence that Harold Smith might be said to have on Laura. And Laura, in turn, is turning to Harold here because, again, in this situation, he's the only person that she feels he can turn to. But even that, we find, is not up to, say, what Laura ultimately needs. And so she runs away, or she says goodbye to Harold in that wonderful, lovely, emotional moment between the two of them. She kisses him on the forehead and on the cheek, and then a very gentle kiss, directly. But it's also a way in which maybe she is also maybe deflecting what his romantic interests may be vis-a-vis Laura Palmer, which we get a hint of in terms of all the relationships that we understand were described, say, in the series. Remember Dr. Jacoby's words about how Laura was filled with secrets, and she was very inscrutable. And so a lot of people knew her, and yet she was also very much, in many ways, a type of a mystery. And so we see that embodiment in terms of this very brief exchange between Harold and Laura. There is a connection between them, yes, but there's also a way in which maybe psychologically Laura still seems to be somewhat standoffish. And that might be on purpose, might be on design, or maybe that might be due to circumstances beyond their control. Because again, it can be said that Laura is seeking some kind of solace or some kind of consultation, again, with this very deep moment here with regard to Bob. And even so, the mentioning of Bob can be said to be very important as a type of real indication, right, of the inner feelings, the inner workings of Laura Palmer. And so in that way, perhaps this relationship that she has with Harold is one of the key relationships with Laura Palmer, in that we get a sense of the inner workings of Laura at this moment. So in many ways, it's one of the closest relationships that Laura has, but also it's still very distant. And so that, I think, is the inherent, say, tragedy that is the situation of Laura Palmer during the course of Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me. And it is this tragedy that we will see maybe confronted, or maybe resolved or unresolved, as the case may be, as we reach the conclusion. When we get to the conclusion of Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me, I'd like to speak a little bit about that as well. But one more thing about Harold Smith and Laura Palmer, which is so important here too, which is the revelation of Bob, what Bob is. Bob is real, unreal. And we get also Laura speaking about Bob too. And there is a type of jarring effect, I feel, when we get this. Laura is this huge figure in Twin Peaks. Bob is this huge figure in Twin Peaks, but I think we hear Laura speak Bob's name, which I think it's a connection of these two larger than life figures in the lore of Twin Peaks, and in a way combined in these fragments of dialogue that Laura is speaking at this moment. It's very jarring, very shocking, actually, and as well as the details, as I mentioned. And then also the mouthing of the refrain, "Fire walk with me." And then not only that, the very, very brilliantly scary cut of Laura Palmer's face suddenly in this black and white, a monstrous look, down to the makeup that is applied on the teeth even. And so this is also very significant too, because as we recall from, say, past images of Laura Palmer, say in the series, Laura Palmer as a tragic figure, Laura Palmer as a victim, Laura Palmer as this mysterious and evasive, maybe in many forms of people, in their minds and imaginations, they had their images and visions of who Laura was, what Laura represented to them, but it was maybe impossible for people to know who Laura is as a person. So she was very much in that way an enigma, a mystery. But she was also in that way too a victim, a tragic victim indeed. But also there were moments where suddenly she would turn almost monstrous, Well, the way that the light shone on her face during a flashback sequence involving Bob and the killing. There's a scream during the series, and I made the remark about how this is also a moment where Laura turned like monster at the same time. We also saw a little bit of this as well, the idea of the smile when she was talking to Bobby earlier in the film, and how the smile becomes this way of manipulation. And the smile reveals both happiness, but also reveals a type of maybe attempt at manipulating the other, which could be said to be almost, in maybe an extreme case, somewhat nefarious. And here we get this sense too. Laura as victim, Laura as being very worried and agitated and very concerned, suddenly becoming a monster right before our very eyes. And Harold's shocked, she's shocked, we are shocked as well. And I think her shock as well at herself, I think, is also very key too, because it then shows this type of self-reflexivity about the victim slash monster aspect of Laura Palmer as she's depicted here. It also drives home the idea of the dual personalities or dueling personalities that Bob and the inhabitation by Bob of hosts seems to suggest. You know, we saw it, of course, in the series and with various characters, and of course we get a hint of that as well in terms of what Bob wants or what Bob is trying vis-a-vis his relationship, Bob's relationship with Laura Palmer. That Bob wants to, the assumption being that Bob wants to inhabit Laura, or else he will do something very, very violent indeed. So this reminds us too of other characters and their other relationships with Bob over the course of the series. But this duality, which she herself acknowledges, which I think is really powerful, this type of self-reflexivity, is very powerful indeed. And we should keep this in mind because if we recall other characters in the series, let me, again, I mentioned before, but we will talk about, make sure you've seen the series, because I'm going to now speak about important plot points about the series. Leland Palmer and Dale Cooper. These are two examples that we recall of people who have been, say, occupied by or inhabited by Bob in one form or another. And of course, we will see perhaps, or we have seen glimpses of how their personalities seem to either try to battle with Bob's personality or maybe are defeated by Bob's personality or overcome by Bob's personality in favor of what Bob is able to do through their bodies, through the vehicle, the physical vehicle. Good vessel or good vehicle, I think, as Leland mentions it at some point in the series. But here with Laura Palmer, what's so fascinating too is the way in which, at least from the outset, again, one can say that maybe Bob has not yet inhabited Laura Palmer, or maybe he has in some capacity or another, who knows, or possessed her. But the point is that there is still this way in which Laura Palmer seems to be not only self-reflexive about it, not only aware of Bob, but maybe also in a way too trying to fight it or combat Bob, or to fight Bob off or defend him away, which is also in an interesting way to compare, for instance, how Leland, maybe there was a hints about when he was a little boy, the summer house, and trying to, about the idea about meeting Bob or seeing this man for the first time. Like playing with fire, etc. But we don't know exactly to what extent he was able to or tried to resist this. There were some hints during the dialogue scenes, especially during Leland Palmer's final moments at the confession, about what he was trying to do, and how, of course, Leland was very regretful and very guilty, and he didn't want to do what it was he ended up doing. But so there are moments of regret, but whether or not that regret also gives way to a sense of self-control on the part of Leland, we're not sure, and we can assume perhaps not. Here, at least at this stage, Laura Palmer seems to be in the position to still have some kind of control, to have some kind of way to battle off or to protect herself. Now, how that will manifest itself over the course of this film, we shall see. We shall see indeed. And then I think we can assume that it will lead to very, very tragic and violent results. Very sad and violent results. Of course, we know what happens to Laura Palmer, which is, of course, the very impetus, the very start of the story Twin Peaks to begin with, the murder of Laura Palmer. We shall see those specific circumstances as the film progresses. But that hint is right here already, and the idea of the duality and possession within this moment itself. Laura Palmer almost becomes this other entity, this monstrous entity before our very eyes, but then reverting back to Laura Palmer, shocked. And then this is the way in which she says goodbye to Harold. The diary is left with him, so this is a very important plot point. We're reminded too of Harold then not being able to venture outside. This is a reminder of the series and then the like. And of course, we shall see Harold again, or we have seen Harold already in the state in one form or another. So, and then this is another important relationship between Laura Palmer, and also this is a revelation of the plot details of Bob, and also this is a revelation of the duality and the dueling nature, duality and dueling. Nature of the forces of Bob and the soul of Laura Palmer, in a manner of speaking. And then, of course, going back and forth in time, this is a really cool point as well, because we then get we go back and forth in sort of chronology, or not chronology, but geography as well, going back to a shot of Dale Cooper and Dale Cooper talking, we assume, back in the FBI offices. And Albert as well is there, and this idea too of the premonition or his vision, and this idea too of Dale Cooper seemingly, maybe almost in a subtle way, looking over the events as they are occurring through the magic of editing and cinema technique. This idea that Dale Cooper has this maybe second sight or ability to see or vision, and the premonition, which of course is very much part of his investigation skills that we see during the Twin Peaks series here and beyond, of course. And then, of course, Albert tests this theory about who the next victim he thinks will be, and this idea of the high school girl, blonde. And he also mentions the aspect of someone who's sexually active, etc., which and the like. And Albert is talking. Also, he mentions too that when the next killing happens, Albert will. He insists that Albert will assist him, etc. And so this idea that Dale Cooper has this vision that's occurring as the film seems to be in Twin Peaks is happening in parallel. It's a nice reminder of what Dale Cooper is and what he will do when he visits Twin Peaks again at the start of the series. Also a reminder of Albert and his role, and also the idea of him looking on the scene as it's ongoing. And it's a reminder too of how cinema is being used in the hands of Lynch and company to again suggest this overall overseeing view of Dale Cooper. And too, indeed, I mentioned going back and forth in time. Remember that Dale Cooper is in this kind of nether state or netherworld state at the end of the second season. What happens to Dale Cooper and what happens, how's Annie? Right, and we'll get a little bit of a glimpse later too, right? The good Dale is in the lodge, right? Speaking of Annie and Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me, we'll speak about that a little bit later in the course of this film. But in any event, yes, we know that Dale Cooper at the end of the season 2, he's in this really perplexing and quite a perplexing conundrum indeed. And to see him back here in this way, sitting back as it were, foreshadowing what is to come. It's a comfort, but also it's a way in which we understand that he is in this nether world and maybe he can't get out. He is also in this way a type of helpless agent. He's not actively investigating. He's not actively on the ground, as it were. He's just sitting back and saying, this is what's going to happen. And so there's this weird way, this great and weird way in which Dale Cooper in this moment feels it's a reminder, it's a lovely reminder because it's great to see Kyle MacLachlan back as Dale Cooper. It's great to see him there. So it's a similarity linked to Twin Peaks, what we love about Twin Peaks. But at the same time, he seems inert. He seems passive. He seems very much helpless. And perhaps maybe a type of a way in which that might add a sense of, say, almost, I don't want to say frustration, but might add a sense of perplexing nature, which then reminds us of the way in which maybe we could say Dale Cooper, the good Dale perhaps, is very much helpless at the end of season 2. And so it's a reminder of the beguiling and quite perplexing nature at the end of season 2. It's also a great welcome return of Dale Cooper, but also it feels, again, very much off. And also too, it feels very much like he is overlooking these events as they're occurring. So it's a reminder of the premonition and the way in which he can see. But he can see things, or maybe he can get a sense of them, but at the same time, at least at this moment, he is sitting back in his chair, and he can only sit back and wait for the next murder to happen, because otherwise he is helpless. He can't stop it. Now, this also might be a subtle clue or subtle hint as to the function of Dale Cooper. Is he able to stop things? Is he able to prevent things from happening? Or is he unable to prevent things from happening, even in moments where he might seek to want to really try to prevent things from happening the way that they might happen? Is this an indication, maybe a subtle clue, or maybe not so subtle clue, or maybe it's a subtle sense of who Dale Cooper was, or maybe it's a subtle foreshadowing of what Dale Cooper might become later, who knows? But is this a clue too, or this an indication or reminder that Dale Cooper is maybe someone who is unable to prevent things from happening? He can only sit back and wait for things to happen, and then he can act. But in terms of whether he can prevent certain things from happening, maybe that's another thing entirely. And that might lead to yet a further examination as to the role, function, and psychology of the great character that is Dale Cooper. But let's keep this in mind if and when it does arise, maybe later in this film, or maybe beyond. But then this goes into the cut of, say, preparing large amounts of food, and this goes back into Twin Peaks world and Meals on Wheels. So remember, and the diner. It's great to see the diner back, but again, similar yet different, because we see Shelley, we see Norma. It's shot from a high angle. We see a lot of high angles in Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. Remember when we had Donna and Laura earlier in the film in the living room there, slowly going down as they're laying on the sofas. Here we have another high angle. We see Norma, another instance here, Norma's haircut. It seems a little bit different from the hairstyle we might come to expect from Norma as we've met her many a time in Twin Peaks, the series. It seems a little bit of a shorter haircut. There's moments, too, of other characters, like Leo. Leo comes to mind, etc. Audrey Horne comes to mind in terms of haircut styles. That seems to change suddenly, but that's okay. That's okay. It's great to see Norma back. It's great to see Shelley back. Heidi as well. Bloody Nose. The diner feels similar yet somewhat different. It's great to see Shelley too in that moment where she's almost not wanting to help Laura with the Meals on Wheels. She's trying to come up with some kind of excuse, and it reminds us too of just that lovely human moment of Shelley. It also this moment too reminds you of how, remember back in the series when they're talking about Laura Palmer's funeral and the way in which the coffin malfunctioned and all that, and it becomes this almost chaotic moment, a very tragic moment of the funeral, and then moments later we get a shot of Shelley talking about and laughing about it, joking about the moment with a couple of few customers at the diner counter there. So it's almost like Shelley, and I don't mean this I'm a big fan of Shelley. I'm a part of the Shelley fan club, but I love those moments where it seems the absurdity also gives rise to a sense of almost mocking, in a way that might seem almost in a way cold. And we see this type of standoffishness, I think, of Shelley at this moment. It's a very subtle moment. She doesn't really want to help, or for whatever reason, but she ends up helping because Norma insists, and she instructs her to do so. And you're not that busy. And so I love that. I love that rounding out of Shelley's character, the three-dimensionality of it. And she's shown to be a very human character in that way. And I love that. I really love that moment. And also it shows too, again, part of the mystique and part of the aesthetic, one can say, of David Lynch, the world of David Lynch, is the idea of the distance between characters, the true nature of the plane of distance between characters, how two characters that might be seen to be occupying the same geographical space might also be said to be very much different or very distant from each other, both on a psychological and an emotional plane. Thus, what one person says might be totally off from what another person says, and that link leads to a sense of comedy, absurdity, and also it's an indication of the inability of people to connect. And this inability of people to connect is one of the great, I think, aspects of humanity that is shown through in David Lynch's work, such as Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, even in a very, very subtle moment like this moment between Norma and Shelley and us and Laura Palmer. there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect or divide. But another great thing about the world of Twin Peaks, Mark Frost, David Lynch, and the cinema of David Lynch, etc., is that when we see characters that are disconnected like this, and the disconnect leads to absurdity, surrealism, humor, the Lynchian aspect of absurdity, etc. This also gives rise to the brilliance and overwhelming sensation one feels when a connection occurs. And it's great to see that that when a connection occurs, it's a beautiful thing indeed. And so when that connection occurs, even in subtle ways like Shelley agreeing to help out Laura, I think it's a subtle, maybe a daily, relatively speaking, minor thing in the grand scheme of things, but still, it's a wonderful reminder again. In the world where there's lots of distance and disconnect, when connections happen, they are really beautiful things indeed. And so this leads into the Meals on Wheels loading the car and the meals, and then this is a great thing as well, because we see a lot of things here converge at once, and we go to the outside. Shelley is of course helping Laura, and Laura's also loading the back. We don't see a lot of interaction between Shelley and Laura here, except at the end of the sequence when Laura rushes off in a panic almost. But we don't see a lot of, say, friendly repartee, at least in this manner, between Shelley and Laura. That's an interesting detail. But also, of course, in terms of the plot, when Laura's outside, she sees in the road there none other than an old lady and a young boy who is masked. And this mask is something that we've seen somewhere before, perhaps, in terms of the shape of it and the nose. And this old lady we've seen in a number of places already. We've seen these people, these figures, earlier in the film with the Philip Jeffries sequence in the corner there. Who are they? And also we've seen them in the series. When we're talking about Meals on Wheels right now, we've seen them in the series with Donna and Meals on Wheels, of course, and that leads to the link between Harold. And of course, they are recognized in the series as this is Mrs. Tremont. And so this is a very, very interesting point indeed, converging of different points. Just prior to this, we saw the sequence with Harold Smith in the film, and now we have the moment of Meals on Wheels, and now we get this bit with this old lady and the young boy who were recognized as Mrs. Tremont and Mrs. Tremont and her grandson, perhaps. So we get these moments that are converging, and each of these 3 points are indeed points that we saw in the series, right? The converging of the Meals on Wheels and Harold and the neighbor and Mrs. Tremont, etc. But they're also converging in almost this disparate order, right? Because we saw Harold's sequence first in Twin Peaks prior to this thing in Twin Peaks. I'm sorry, we saw this the scene between Harold and Laura Palmer in Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me prior to this sequence of Meals on Wheels. And then we get at the same time Mrs. Tremont and the grandson, which we saw a little glimpse of earlier with Philip Jeffries. So it seems like it's a jigsaw puzzle where the pieces are all scattered about, but they come together at this moment. So the 3 pieces being Mrs. Tremont and her grandson, Meals on Wheels, and Harold Smith, although they occurred kind of scattershot throughout the order of Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, which I think is very fascinating too. It's also indicative of the way in which this film Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me is dealing with links to the series, but also dealing with them in a way that is also very much like a jigsaw puzzle type of framework, which I love. I really love. And also we have to keep in mind too, will there be let's speak about Chalfonts when we get to the end credits of this film, Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. But in the meantime, yes, who are these people? Who is this old lady? Who is this young boy? Why is he wearing this mask? What's going on? Why are they dressed up like this? And so why are they speaking to Laura Palmer in the Meals on Wheels in a way during a moment where Laura and Shelley are, we would assume, loading the car up with meals, one of which we would assume go to their very house, which is right next to Harold, or right near Harold Smith's own house. So all these things are converging. What's going on here? We're not sure. And they're in the middle of the street. No one else is around. Laura goes to them, and this old lady gives her this painting. Right, this would look nice on your wall. And so this is a very odd moment A very strange moment, and we see the painting. It looks like a room with a doorway, or which is open ajar, lit beyond. What's beyond, we're not sure. And then we get the boy with his mask and this pointed nose. Again, we've seen similar masks like this in the sequence involving Philip Jeffries, for instance, uh, and the sequence of place which might be, again, superimposed over that, Garmonbozia. So what is the link therefore be? And we saw these two figures appear in that sequence as well, superimposed, Garmonbozia, right? A jumping man, etc. And so what is their relationship between Bob, the man from another place, and these other figures, the jumping man, etc., the lodge, and Twin Peaks? What is their relationship, and what is their relationship maybe with Deer Meadow and Fat Trout and Chalfonts, etc., and Chet Desmond, The Ring? What's going on in terms of their configuration within this whole landscape, this lattice work that is the lore of Twin Peaks? We're not sure, and also what is their agenda? What is their agenda? Because, as I say, the old lady gives Laura this painting. This would look nice on your wall. And then the young boy is whispering, right? He says, the man behind the mask is looking for the book with the pages torn out. Or let me say, the man behind the mask is looking for the book with the pages torn out. He is going towards a hiding place. He is under the fan now. So this is something of a very peculiar point, because we will then see much immediately after the sequence who this man might be referring to, and the like, and maybe Bob and Leland. Of course, we'll get to that immediately after this, but it begs the question, not only who these people are, but what is their agenda? Are they allies? Are they enemies? Are they trying to help Laura? Are they trying to thwart Laura's efforts? What's going on? What is the relationship with the man from another place? What's the relationship with Bob? It would seem that at this point anyway, they might be wanting to maybe help Laura. What is the significance of the painting? We're not sure yet. We might see it play itself out later on in the film. But depending on that too, we can maybe get a further sense of what their place is. Are they allies, or are they foes? Or are they somewhere in a gray area? We're not sure. But it seems like maybe what the boy is saying, or the boy's whispering, might be something that is trying to help Laura. Possibly. The painting might be something that is trying to help Laura. Possibly. And if we think about that too, then why were they in the room with the Philip Jeffries sequence to begin with? What is their relation? Why are they in the same room with Bob and the man from another place? And also reminds us too, what is the man from another place's own, say, role? Is he a good guy or a bad guy? I mean, maybe we thought he might have been quote unquote a good guy in the series. Maybe he's more of a malevolent figure now in Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. Who knows? Who knows? Maybe something of the opposite is occurring. If we recall from the series, Mrs. Tremont and the little boy might have had a sense of somewhat of the mysterious, and maybe even the sinister, with the cream corn and J&M Solitaire and the Meals on Wheels. So we're not sure. And then of course they weren't there because there was another Mrs. Tremont there. So there were two Tremonts. Weird, huh? But anyway, any event, this type of situation about who these characters are in this landscape of Twin Peaks, are they friends or are they foes? Or maybe they never were any to begin with, who knows? These are questions that are continuing and that are ongoing, I think. And these scenes like this, I think, really help to cement the furtherance of those enigmas, which is part of the great brilliance that is Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, and the like. So who are these people? Who knows?